Thank you all very much indeed for coming along, for registering and coming along. The success of this event relies entirely on a balance between this wonderful panel we have up here and you asking questions and interacting with us. And I'll do my best to convene from here. It's, of course, Innovation Month in the APS, and that's what this is all about. This is one of the great events from here, hosted by Department of Environment, and but of course there's many of you here from many other departments, so welcome everybody. My name is Nick Gales. I'm the Chief Scientist from the Australian Antarctic Division down in Hobart, and also Chief Science Advisor up here in the Department of Environment. What I'm going to do is introduce the panel first, talk for just a couple of minutes around how we're going to enjoy, I hope, the next hour or a little over, and then we'll kick off with questions. But before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and the region. We'd also like to acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's meeting, so welcome. I'd also just think it's worth noting, as you walk into the building, you will have seen the flags flying at half-mast. It's a year since MH17 came down, was shot down over a war zone, and I think it's just worth reflecting how extraordinarily lucky we all are to live in a country where random and very violent events of that nature visit us very rarely, and I think we should remember that event and perhaps reflect on what a lucky country we do live in. So I will start, and I'm going to unashamedly read out the introductions of the panel members because I don't want to miss anything because they're a wonderful group, and I'm going to start with Natalie on our far left here. So Natalie's the founder and managing director of Inside Policy, which is Natalie's latest venture. It's a national collaboration of policy wonks, political operatives and technical geeks who love making the world a better place by designing new solutions to old and complex policy challenges. Since 2001, Inside Policy has advised Department of Employment, Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Indigenous Business Australia, Reconciliation Australia, Supply Nation, Accor, Qantas, New South Wales Aboriginal Housing Office and the City of Sydney. Prior to founding Inside Policy, Natalie established Supply Nation, a social enterprise designed to integrate Indigenous Australian-owned, controlled and managed businesses into the supply chains of Australia's largest companies and government agencies. And in 2012, Natalie was named as one of Australia's 100 Women of Influence. So welcome, Natalie. We're lucky to have you here. Immediately on my left is Pia Waugh, who is the Director of Coordination and Gov 2.0 for Technology and Procurement Division at the Department of Finance, but I'm told this morning she's currently moonlighting at DTO. Pia is working within the machine of government to enable greater transparency, democratic engagement, citizen-centric design and real pragmatic actual innovation in the public sector and beyond. Pia was awarded also as one of the top 100 most influential women in Australia for 2014. Pia is currently looking at whole of government technology, services and procurement as part of this work. So Pia runs data.gov.au and current projects include Gov 2.0, community development and a whole range of other things that include Open Knowledge Australia, and I'm not going to read them out, and you can talk to Pia afterwards and the rest of the panel around some of their engagements. So on my right immediately is Carolyn Curtis. She's the CEO of the Australian Centre for Social Innovation and the founding director of Family by Family. Carolyn spent over a decade working in South Australia's child protection system, Families South Australia, in a range of roles from practitioner to policy development and management. Having built programs both inside and outside government, Carolyn is ideally placed to lead and demonstrate the value of social innovation in Australia. And finally, on my far right, Jason Cotton. He's worked as Innovation Practice Director at Nucleus. Jason's career in innovation began by leading the Orica Live Wire program, which was widely recognised at the time as the best practice program in corporate innovation. In 2002, Jason started Dynamic Horizons with the purpose of building innovation capability in Australian organisations. Dynamic Horizons built a strong list of government and corporate clients. Jason has most recently held senior innovation roles with City Power Powercore, which was awarded an Australian Business Award for Innovation in 2013, and globally with Cisco in the Services Innovation Excellence Centre. So welcome to all of you. Thank you all for giving up your very valuable time. We're very fortunate to have a wonderful group of innovators covering a wide range of innovation space. So we are honestly today live, unscripted and interactive, and I stress that interaction part. Please engage in questions. I will be kicking off a question, but I've got a long list of questions I can ask. If you're all silent, I don't think that'll be very interesting, so I'm hoping that apart from a kick-off question, we're just hearing from the panel and not from me. There's a couple of housekeeping things I have to do, I believe. There are toilets. If you need to leave within the next hour or immediately afterwards, go out here, turn to your right and you'll see them down there. And if the alarms sound, it's the way you came in. So follow the group. I'm sure we'll be receiving assistance if the alarms go off, and we'll head out the front door and convene where we're asked to. Can you all please make sure your phones are on silent or off? And a couple of things, I think just broadly where we're going to go with the questions, and I'm sure the panel will take us where they think we should go, which is likely the right places, but we're going to talk about things like what does innovation look like in the APS, are we doing it sufficiently well now, how might we do it better, and what is it and who is it that drives innovation. And I just wanted to note that yesterday I was lucky enough to be down at the Threatened Species Summit in Melbourne, opened by a minister, and had a great turnout of people around an area of work that has a lot to do with the work of those of us in the Department of Environment. And there was a workshop on innovation in there, and I was really encouraged by the maturity of the discussion that went on in that group, where the discussion's gone a long way from considering innovation as just the design of some clever gadgets that you might stick to an animal or measure a sensor, and there were very broad ranges. It includes that, and that's important. There was discussions around new gene technologies for controlling invasive animals and so forth, which are critically important and really exciting. But there was also a lot of discussion around innovation in the science policy interface and in the community buy-in space, where there were areas that had as much social benefit as they had environmental benefit, and really innovative programs. So it was encouraging to see that level of maturity in an innovation space around threatened species. So to kick off, that's all I will say, and maybe we'll just start off with, we'll go around the panel, starting off with Natalie, on some initial reflections on what might innovation look like in the APS, and particularly whether or not, and I expect it's a common view, whether or not these are innovation as a rare event in the province of high achievers, or whether it's part of our everyday workplace. And maybe, Natalie, if you can start the conversation off, please.
Okay. Well, I guess if I break down that question and think first about what is innovation to me, it really is, to me, getting stuff done in a better way. That's what it means to me in a really simple way. And I guess if I put a bit more depth to that, it's about how does the way that we currently do things change, get better, more efficient, help us achieve better life outcomes. And when we look at examples from our everyday life, you look at how we used to do our banking 10 years ago compared to how we do our banking now. Most of us would probably do our banking now through our smartphones with an app. But when 10 years ago we had to either withdraw cash or go to a bank, to withdraw cash or do whatever transaction we wanted to do. Even now we don't probably go onto the web to do our banking. We probably, again, just use an app on our smartphone. The way that we engage with the world, that we book accommodation, book flights, it has dramatically changed from the way that we used to do things 10 years ago. That's what innovation does. It makes us do things differently in much more efficient and effective ways. When I think about innovation in a government context, I see that innovation exists at all levels. So it's not just in pursuit of achieving better policy outcomes, but also in the pursuit of how those outcomes are designed and monitored, and how services are delivered and designed, and how programs are delivered and designed. So innovation can exist at all different levels, but what I would say would be critical ingredients for innovation to exist is a sense of entrepreneurialism, and by that I mean an adaptability, an ability to take risk, a risk appetite, coupled with experimentation. So the desire to, or actually the ability to not have to be right all the time. Being able to fail and learn from that and iterate and redesign and really work to build products, services and policies from the perspective of the end user and what's going to be the most effective outcome for the client group that you're trying to serve at the end of the day. And if that's, for Centrelink, it's the people who are receiving Centrelink payments every fortnight. If it's hospital patients in hospitals, if it's young people, children and families in the child protection system, job seekers going through JSAs, whatever it is, what is going to make their lives easier and create a nation that supports those groups in the most effective and efficient way.
Thanks, Natalie. Pia.
I think innovation has become a little bit like magic beans. So you've got people who know how to grow beans, who sort of go, well, they're just magic beans, they're really just beans. And then you've got people who don't know how to grow beans who go, well, they're magic beans, there's something special, there's something new, there's something shiny. And there's a sort of a magicism around innovation that means that the people who know how to grow beans have withdrawn entirely from the conversation in a lot of cases, and the people who are in the conversation actually don't know how to grow beans. So I think there's a disconnect, which I think I've observed in the last couple of years has started to come back together a little bit. But part of the problem is that innovation means very different things to very different people. Innovation to me is a clever hack. It's an attitude of wanting to do something better. Now that something could just be the process that you do in your everyday job. It could be building something new. It could be all the sort of stuff that Natalie was talking about. But it is doing something better than what is currently done. And that basically means a personal desire to take responsibility to do it better and to route around the damage and that kind of thing. Now, so innovation is actually an attitude as much as anything else, because it's what comes out of that kind of attitude and that kind of approach that you can, is actually a bean that might be seen as magic. I guess that from my perspective, from the APS, and I'm still fairly new to the APS, to government generally, I've done a bit of work in states and a bit of work in federal. The problem is that the capability for innovation at an individual level versus an agency level versus a whole of APS level is quite different. I was asked the other day about the innovation capability of different agencies and whether they could do certain things. And the problem is that if you take the individuals out, they're capable of great things in a lot of cases, but within the construct and the frameworks of different agencies, some more so than others, often they're quite limited, or they feel like they're limited and the result is the same. I've had people fairly senior, EL1s, EL2 sort of say, I need permission to innovate. It's like, no, you don't, just do it. Why aren't you just innovating? Why aren't you just, asking forgiveness rather than permission? But there's a culture in the APS of asking permission rather than forgiveness, and I think that that's something that is starting to change, but it's fairly slow. So I think we have enormous capability to innovate, and I think that, and a quick example for you, when I started in the job that I have at finance, I specifically wanted to work in IT, in Gov 2.0, in doing open government kind of stuff, in a whole of government context. So I particularly chased working in where I came to work. But what I really wanted to do also was open data. So the job that I had was a full-time job. In 2 weeks, after starting the job, I automated about 60, 70% of the job, and then went to my boss and said, okay, cool, now I want data.gov.au, and he gave it to me. The point is that I think a lot of people in the public service think that the process that they follow is actually their personal worth, and it's not true. You are not your job. You are a independent and clever and intelligent person who obviously wants to have value in your life and value in your job. So wanting to innovate shouldn't be something that is a KPI. It should be something that you just want to do because you want to have a better life and a better job and you have your own desires and goals. But I think we try to systemize innovation a bit too much, which actually ends up killing it. So great opportunity, great capability, but not enough actually happening for a variety of reasons in the APS.
Thank you, Pia. Carolyn.
Well, as Pia said, innovation means very different things to all of us. So today I'll talk about what it means for me and everyone at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. I have a background in the public sector, and I spent, over a decade working in the public sector. And I left because it didn't matter what I did or how I thought about things. I wasn't seeing any different outcomes for the people I was working with. So every day we were still removing more and more children from their families. We were putting those kids in care. Those kids, even when we did remove them, instead of being abused by their parents, they were being abused by the system and still having diabolical outcomes. I had 150 staff sitting under me, and I ran out of things to tell them. And I no longer felt like I was adding any value or contributing anything positive to anyone's life. But we work in the public sector, and I'm assuming you work in the public sector because you fundamentally believe that Australians deserve to live a good life or a great life, and that you believe that all Australians deserve to live a great life, not just those that can afford to or have the opportunities to. So we desperately need innovation and transformative innovation, because from a social policy, social outcome perspective, things are at an all-time low. And for decades now, there have been social outcomes for Australian people that haven't shifted, in fact, have continued to get worse. So I stress the word all, because I think equality is a really big, important aspect of social innovation anyway. Often people come to us and they say, can we work with Taxi because we want our organisation or our government department to be innovative? And so we've done a lot of thinking about the conditions that you need to have in place and the environment that you need for innovation to happen. And when I talk about innovation today, I'm going to talk more about the transformative form of innovation, not service improvement, but transformative paradigm shifting innovation. And when you think about the role and function of your government department, you could describe yourselves as a performance engine, okay? We'll talk about engines. You have certain KPIs you have to achieve, certain outputs you need to achieve. You have budgets you have to meet, deadlines, and your KPIs are very measured and kind of driven from the top down. When you look and analyse the conditions required for really good, rigorous innovation, they are fundamentally at odds with the conditions required to perform. So the conditions required to innovate are ones around learning, reflection, adaptability, flexible budgets and different approaches to procurement, around failing, around testing, experimenting. And so when you look at the conditions required for a performance engine versus the conditions required for an innovation engine, the two don't get along that well. But they can, if we can really have an open conversation about it and really analyse the different conditions that you need. And so some of the work we've been doing with different government departments is looking at how do you create those conditions and what's the relationship between a performance engine and an innovation engine, because there does need to be a really strong relationship there and some crossover. And how do you lead that? Because leadership and buy-in at every level is really critical. And I think until we have those really overt conversations and start to really build the conditions for rigorous transformative innovation, we're still going to see policy and systems that are driven from the top down, that are based on long lists of assumptions and that don't really improve outcomes for all Australian people. So that might sound very negative, but I think that there are some really good pockets of great innovation happening across Australia. And I'm sure there's some great innovation happening with the APS as well. But I think it's complex and I think it's really challenging work. And I think we are really obsessed with talking about the what when we really need to be talking about the how.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carolyn. Jason.
Thank you. I'd like to add to that, actually, Carolyn. I think we also need to talk about the why.
Yeah.
Right. One of my favourite TED Talks is by Simon Sinek, and he talks about the why. Always talk about why it's important for you to do what you do. The number one question I've been asked in organisations I've worked with is exactly this question: what is innovation and why is it important? And I think I've come up with this very simple definition that I used in my last role at City Power Corp, which is innovation is something new that adds or creates value. And value can be value to a customer, it can be value to society, it can be value to the business, or the panacea would be that it's all three. And I think that if you talk from a creation of value perspective, it encompasses everything from a continuous improvement, let's tweak what we currently do, right through to that transformative innovation that occurs. I also think that the purpose of innovation it's twofold. The OECD came out, I think it was last year, and said that there's a race to the top, and that economic prosperity is going to be determined by innovation, whether a society is innovative or not. At some level, I agree with that. I think there is a definite link between economic prosperity, whether that be at an organisation level or at a society level, and its capacity to innovate. But I also think that there's a second part to that equation. And this part came to me in a conversation I had with the Chinese delegation, and we were discussing this notion of why is innovation important. And through the interpreter came back this amazing view on it. And the view was that it gives an organisation life force. And I thought that was quite poignant. That if you think of an organisation or a society where innovation is flourishing, what does it feel like? What does it look like? What's it like to be in that situation? Now, I spent some time last year in Silicon Valley. Man, that place is alive. It's crazy, but it's alive. There's just this incredible vibe that's there. Now, wouldn't it be great if you could capture that sort of life force, where people wanted to be where they were and not aspiring to be somewhere else? Now, whether that be, again, at an organisation or societal level. So I think innovation has a role definitely from a financial or a value perspective, but it also has a role at a societal perspective to really build a life force and a vibrancy within society. Just as the other panel members were talking, a couple of things came to mind. Been a bit of a student of innovation the last 20 years in a number of different forms, and I'm having this sort of question in my mind about what is the role of government in terms of building innovation capability and capacity. And I was talking earlier before we started about a different conversation that I think we need to have, and that conversation's around activation of entrepreneurship or implementation or commercialisation, whatever you want to call it. That the role of government and policy is to activate innovation and entrepreneurship with our society. It needs to put the infrastructures in place and attract, and I was talking about these four circles, that in Silicon Valley, what I noticed was that there were four elements. There was ideas and talent and knowledge and capital, and that Silicon Valley creates an open market where those four things come together. It's creating that sort of environment where you've got really talented people, great ideas, leading edge knowledge and access to some funds to make some stuff happen. So I think that the more we can think about that in our policy development, about how we activate that within our society, the better it would be. My view. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason. Now, if that doesn't spark questions, those range of perspectives from our panel members, I think I'm going to be on my own asking questions. I'm sure you'll be full of questions. So the way this will work, it is being recorded. I should have said that at the start. All of this will be recorded. So anything you say will be there forever. But it's going to be put up on our website, I think. That's what the recording will be used for. So if you have questions, I'll ask you to put your hand up and identify yourself and your question, and then we'll move around the room. So the first question. Thank you.
I don't think you're going to like this, but what's the hashtag?
Yeah. Good question.
Oh, we haven't got one yet, but it's going to go, I think, on the PSI network, the industry website.
So can we use PS Innovate 15? So hashtag PS Innovate 15 might be.
So, yeah.
There you go. Hashtag PS Innovate 15.
Thank you.
I was just wondering also, how would the policy processes change in regards to my frustration with having come from IT and now working in a policy environment and finding the processes totally frustrating, asking why all the time and saying, but you should know the answer, when really all I'm trying to do is wonder why people are still following the old processes and not thinking outside the box. I don't really know how to deal with senior management in that way. Any pointers?
Yeah.
Pia, do you want to kick off on
I'd
that?
love to kick off on that. I
I could feel you there.
certain topics get me really het up, and this is one. I think we have a fundamental problem where the way that people are taught, first of all, policy and implementation is completely disconnected in the APS. Now, it's not so much so in other jurisdictions as much, but that disconnect, and not just disconnect, the pride of the disconnect. Policy people are like, oh no, we don't get our hands dirty. And implementation people are like, oh no, we're not like those policy people. So the active disconnect means that policy is not informed by reality, and reality doesn't help inform policy. So we end up with policies that even if they are perfect, even on the off chance that everything for some reason comes perfect and we get a great policy, it'll be out of date before it's even implemented. And then we do a post-policy implementation review after the fact to see whether it was successful or not, which is stupid. We should be like tracking it as we go and seeing, and actually having an iterative approach as we do in IT to say, well, as we do in good IT projects anyway, where we say, we've put this in place, we've baselined it, is it doing what we expect? No, let's tweak it. Is it doing what we expect? No, let's tweak it. We should be taking that iterative evidence-based approach. But I think in the APS we've learnt to, or at least some people have learnt to systematically bury heads in the sand and not measure because we're just doing what we're told, right? That's the first problem. The second problem is, and I'll only do two, I promise. The second problem is the way that policy is taught. So I got into massive arguments with a lecturer just a couple of years ago, and because we had an essay which was about the policy cycle, you know, the Bridgman and Davis policy cycle, which every person is taught when you're doing policy study. And I looked at this cycle, I'm like, this is total bollocks. Like, it's ridiculous. It makes, it not only is misrepresentative of how policy actually comes about, but it gives you a cycle that if you follow the cycle, then you get to tick the box and say, yes, I followed the process, but it doesn't actually mean that you end up anywhere. So I know people that have been trying to get, cabinet submissions through for years, and they just don't know why. And it's because, they're taught a particular approach of doing things. So I actually wrote an alternative policy cycle, which I then got into a lot of arguments with my lecturer about. But the essay was about, is the policy cycle correct or relevant? And I said it is both deeply flawed and completely relevant, because it's flawed, but it's how everyone's taught. So when you understand that's how everyone's taught, you can go, oh, you think you're in this part of the cycle and that's why you're acting in this way, even though that makes no sense from a reality perspective. So I think we need to question how we teach and think about policy. I think we need to remember that policy is deeply political, and we need to remember, how did policy come about? What are all the pressures that informed policy development? What do we mean by policy? For some people, it's a couple of dot points on a napkin. For some people, it's a 400-page document. It's like innovation. It's become a bit of a vacuous word in some ways. But at the heart of it, we need to get to a more evidence-based, iterative approach that actually measures as it's going, so that we can have a far more informed approach to getting a good policy outcome, because an iterative policy approach means even bad policy becomes good policy.
And I think maybe the other thing I would add to that is, what is the role of citizens in policy development? And how do we think about engaging our citizens in a meaningful way? Because at the end of the day, surely one of the things we want to do as a government is build agency in people and build people's ability to have a sense of control in terms of managing their lives, solving their own problems. And this kind of top-down coercive approach is just doing the direct opposite. Like you're building a massive kind of welfare dependence. And I think we need to be valuing our citizens a whole lot more and involving them in the development of policy and systems. And I think that people often talk about innovation and risk. If you want to de-risk your policy, You should be working with your citizens and testing your assumptions at every step of the way, which is the iterative part. We tend to develop policy, programs, everything based on what we believe to be true, where we need to really be testing what we believe to be true and build the right policy for the right problem.
Yeah. We end up with policy-based evidence rather than evidence-based policy.
Yeah. There's one of my favourite quotations is from a guy called Henri Bergson, and he said, "The tools of the mind become a burden when the environment which made them necessary no longer exists." And I think not a truer word had been spoken, that we create a policy or a process around policy for a particular environment, and we don't keep an eye on that environment. We don't understand how that environment's changed. We spoke earlier about how banking's changed in the last 10 years. I mean, look at how content has changed in the last 10 years. Right? The crowdsourcing movement that's happened. I mean, people are writing movie scripts now from the crowd. Right, which is really fascinating. You can see these scripts being developed almost like a Wikipedia. It's absolutely brilliant. Not sure they'll sell any movies, but anyway, it's just fascinating to watch how that's developed. So look at what's happening in the environment and how do we need to change our approach to policy and policy development according to that environment.
So part of the core of that question was around the stifling culture, I guess, of anti-innovation culture, not just where we should go. Does anyone have any comments around how we actually address that within? Now, this is an APS audience, but I don't think it's large organisational audience. How do you challenge that culture from within? Yeah,
look, I think, and I've had many discussions about this, and I like to debunk the myth that people are fearful of failure. We fear failure here, that's part of our problem. They don't. They fear the consequences of failure. And that's a leadership issue. So if we run an experiment and it doesn't go according to plan or it doesn't quite work out for us, people actually don't fear making the mistake. They fear the consequences of making that mistake. So we need to have a different leadership model is actually my view. And someone talked earlier about being able to run, the business while you're undertaking transformative innovation, and the two don't match together, right? That's a leadership mindset. It's about how do you run a parallel mental model where you're working on the business and in the business at the same time.
I think leadership is both important and unimportant. I think we actually put a little too much emphasis on leadership sometimes because often enough in the APS, the worst thing a person can do to you is criticise you. Like, it's so hard to fire even really bad people, right? Really, it's true, right? So if it's hard for people to get rid of you, then what's the problem? What are you scared of? Why not take the risk? Like, you can't have it both ways. I've had people say to me, we really want to do something, but, something might go wrong and we might get criticised. I'm like, so? If someone criticises you, that's just a chance for growth. It's either valid criticism or invalid criticism, whether it's given to you positively or negatively. Either way, you can take it or leave it. So I think that the culture of being scared of criticism in the public service in particular, which isn't so much outside the public service in my view, is a problem that has nothing to do with leadership and everything to do with individuals, taking that on. A couple of other things though, I think in Australia we have a problem that we kind of educate people to be users, not makers. So, kids at school are taught IT as in, the way they're taught IT is, here's how to use Office, here's how to use a computer, don't break it. Oh, don't install anything. No, this is a commercial environment, you can't do anything with it. And so we're taught to be users, not makers, and it's only by being a maker. If everyone's taught how to shape the world around them, rather than to be shaped by the world around them, that's how you get innovation. And the final thing I'll say is collaboration's a big one. So spoke about collaboration with citizens before. I think in the public service, a lot of people sort of say, well, obviously we're the experts, so we need to, design all the things and then put it on all the people. First of all, people don't tend to collaborate outside of their team, let alone their agency, let alone their jurisdiction, let alone their country, right? So we're not always building on the shoulders of giants. We're trying to reinvent the wheel, so much so. So the first thing is to recognise that the world is our sandpit and we should be going out of our little, workspaces into the whole world so that we can build on the best that the world has to offer rather than reinventing the wheel. And the second thing is really that culture of collaboration. It's by having a multidisciplinary team, having your policy and implementers in the room, having scientists in the room, having academics in the room, having citizens in the room, having, the messy person that, doesn't at all fit in with your view of what the perfect customer is in the room to challenge your assumptions is a good thing. So, but people tend to not collaborate and then say, oh, I need permission to collaborate. No, you don't. Just go and talk to someone. I gave a speech a while ago about collaboration, and at the very end of this whole speech about collaboration, this guy stood up and said, so Pia, what are you doing to help me collaborate? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Collaboration is a mindset, and it is critical to innovation.
Let's have another question from the audience. And then we'll go to Natalie.
Hi, Maria.
So one of the things that was talked about in transformative innovation, I think that a lot of the emphasis is on the sort of continual improvement, etc. But in terms of the transformative innovation, I think there's going to be more public-private partnerships required where people sort of start to think, well, and that comment about the role of government increasing from what government does now to, something beyond that, or maybe actually decreasing and saying, well, there's a role for the public, the private sector or academia in this. How do we engage them? But if you look around, a lot of the experiences in Triple Ps are in infrastructure, and that's a very different kettle of fish to policy or regulation. So I'm just interested in some lessons learned from outside of that infrastructure world or comments that you've got in that area. Thanks.
Natalie, do you want to kick off on that one?
I think that there's a couple of critical ingredients for that. I think the first question that needs to be resolved is, what is the role of government? And if you see the role of government as being the doer and the problem solver, then you're going to own all of the responsibility, and then you're going to increase the risk aversion, and then you're going to stifle innovation. But if you see the role of government as an enabler, that changes the mindset, how it engages and who it engages with. And it goes back to what Pia was saying before about collaboration. If the role of government is to enable, then you're going to be, it's going to lend itself more to seeing the world as your sandpit, and you're going to see, okay, who needs to be brought into this? What expertise, what knowledge, what resources do I need to solve this policy problem? And where do I get that, and where do I find those things? And then you bring them together and you enable that bringing together, and then supporting a new way of designing policy or services or programs. And you support the right players to do that. I'll give you an example from within the Australian government that's public. Given that this is being recorded, I should only talk about public stuff. Department of Employment now, back when the initiative was launched, it was the Department of Employment Workplace Relations. Department of Employment runs or enabled the Social Enterprise Development and Investment Funds. So in 2010, it dedicated $20 million out of the Jobs Fund for the particular purpose of catalysing the social impact investment market in Australia. So social impact investment is essentially about how can social enterprises, how can not-for-profits get other forms of capital that's not grant funding from government to be able to scale and grow and achieve on a greater level their social objectives and their mission. And so from that $20 million, $40 million was then created, because the $20 million helped seed 3 individual fund managers who then were able to attract other investment, which then invested in a whole range of different social enterprises. It's early days in terms of achievement of policy outcomes, and if you define policy outcomes as what social impact has created, anyone in the social impact space will tell you that you need at least 10 to 15 years to measure social impact. So we can't tell the story on that piece yet, but what we can say is there's been a significant growth and shift in the actual social impact market itself in Australia, in part because of the $20 million investment by government, but also in part because of the role that government played in that. It clearly defined itself as an enabler. It was not an investor. It did not directly invest the funds in social enterprises. It gave the funds to those who know how to invest money to do that, because that's what they know how to do. It wasn't its place to control the investment decisions or how the funds structured themselves, because again, they're best placed to make those decisions. They know how to do that stuff the best. And so I think that that's actually a really interesting model around innovation, around how government and private sector players can work together more constructively to achieve greater, bigger, better, faster policy outcomes. And all this, the progress reports on CDIF are actually on the Department of Employment website, so you can actually have a look at the progress that it's made. In particular, I think it's a great case study in the different way that government and the private sector can have a relationship, where it's collaborative, where it's iterative, where they were prepared to take a lot of risk, not be bound by the traditional contract management relationships where you either are defined by outputs or outcomes, and giving a whole lot of control over to the people who know best, or the organisations that know best. So I think that's a really critical ingredient of forming public and private partnerships in the social policy space.
Can I just ask a follow-up based on that? So
Can we just wait for the microphone? Just 2 secs.
Just to follow up on that, so if you take that approach, and I totally support it, what happens when those non-traditional contracts go wrong? How do we deal with that?
So what comes with that, what comes with defining the role of government as an enabler, is also an acceptance that things are going to go wrong, and that's okay. So it's not about avoiding the wrong, and actually using the wrong, and I put that in inverted commas, as another point of iteration. And it's exactly what Pia said in IT projects. When you design a prototype, you think it's going to work, you test it, you see, okay, no, it's not actually doing what we wanted it to do. Let's shift, let's change. That's exactly what they did with CDIF. And all of the funds are viable. They're investing. There's been no major catastrophes. And as I said, I mean, the unknown is the social impact that's been created, but we were never going to know that in 5 years. Well, it was always going to be a longer horizon. But there's also an acceptance within that team that manages CDIF within the Department of Employment that actually failure is okay, because what we were doing was creating something new when it didn't exist before. So we had to try something different.
But also I'd ask, what happens when the traditional method goes wrong?
Yeah.
All right, why is it any different?
It's actually better for it to go wrong in this way, because
Yeah.
you can pick it earlier and save your losses, whereas, figuring out that it's gone wrong 2 years after you've finished is a problem.
Yeah, and look, just a quick example. A friend and colleague of mine in Victoria undertook a partnership with the Victorian government on a particular exercise. Really novel. It was to generate an app through a hack process. That process, just to get to the starting point, was over 6 months and many iterations of a 200-page document to run a very simple process. I would say that's a failing of the traditional ways of doing things.
So I'll give you a couple of examples that I've sort of had as well. So the first one is, I think that the traditional public-private partnership Australian approach hasn't been great. So if you compare, and I actually did a very short, although very internal paper on this a while ago, comparing MIT labs versus NICTA and CSIRO. The approach that we've tended to take in Australia, and it's no fault of those organisations, but it's an Australian kind of approach, is that the way that we've measured innovation is fundamentally wrong. We tend to measure it in terms of intellectual property and R&D expenditure, which means it's kind of skewed in a very heavy way towards very big players and doesn't really measure actual output and doesn't measure any of the things that we've spoken about, innovation supposed to being able to enable. It sort of measures a very different approach. So the way that we measure innovation is a little bit problematic. So in Australia, we've tended to say, find a project, find an investor, partner with that investor, and then take it to market. And then, of course, if you look at the natural motivation of that investor, they are naturally motivated to take as long as possible to go to market, because the government agency involved is the one that's got to defend the intellectual property, is got to be the one that's going to try to push. MIT labs, the different approach is they have, as little bubbles of, excuse the term, but intellectual property kind of float up, multiple people or multiple organisations get access to it simultaneously, which means that they actually have a natural competitive reason to try and innovate on top of it and take it to market as quickly as possible. So they actually have a far more, streamlined approach to actually take something from research into the market, because it's tapping into that natural motivation of the competitive process. So I think that's one example of something that we could do better. But another one is thinking about, and again, building on natural motivation and building on the fact that there are a lot of citizens out there that want to do stuff already. If we take the idea of government as an enabler and build upon it a little bit more and go towards government as a platform, or as I like to say, government as an API, if we can take the systems and data and content that we have to create as part of our natural job and make that more publicly available, citizens will mash up what we do in ways that we can't even imagine to solve their own problems in ways that we can't right now, because they're motivated to do so. An individual agency is motivated by their rules, by their executive orders. A citizen doesn't care what agency we work for, what jurisdiction we work for, they just want what they need. So GovHack, I think, is a good example of a public-private partnership in a non-traditional sense, which works quite well. We open up data, we open up systems, we get government people in the same room with citizens and companies and all kinds of interesting people, and just let them loose and see what they can do. And people solve problems in ways that we, in the APS, are not naturally motivated to do so. And the quick example, there's many examples in GovHack, but a really great one is the energy ratings data set that was published by the Department of Industry. It's just all of the electrical devices have an energy rating, and so they just published the entire data set, 7 million devices updated daily with all their energy ratings, right? Like a dozen applications were developed that do all kinds of clever things that they didn't even imagine. But more importantly, the private sector, the retail sector, suddenly had a source of truth and could actually dramatically reduce their regulatory burden by being able to go to the source of truth with what they had to put in their advertising and their brochures and all the rest of it, rather than just having to Google as they used to do. So I think opening up our doors and not just being an enabler in a policy sense, but an enabler in a very practical and material sense helps the rest of the society, government as a node in the network, not the hierarchy of the network.
Yeah. And can I just add another example to that? Being a massive data geek, I love data. I love data.gov.au. Yay. Sometimes I'll spend my weekends just looking at what you...
Me too.
Yeah, okay,
Me too.
great.
We should hang out.
Yeah, no, we should be friends. And just to go to Pia's point, so a particular passion of mine, given my background, is monitoring the spend that government's doing with diverse suppliers. Yes. So we built a web app that's in prototype at the moment. It's called Slice of Pie, and you can go to sliceofpie.com.au, but you do need a login to check out the full functionality. But it's basically a reporting tool to give agencies visibility over the spend that they're doing with diverse suppliers. And we've been able to use the contract awarded data from data.gov.au to be able to pull that together with the list of diverse suppliers that we've created and match that information to give government visibility over who are you doing business with beyond the Commonwealth banks of the world, beyond the top 200 companies, who are the diverse suppliers that you're doing business with. And that's important for, I think, agencies to understand, but also I think it's important for the small business sector to understand, to be able to use that information as leverage to go into government and be smart about how they do their pitches and win government work. So yes, a big tick to data.gov.au and open information, open government.
Let's move to another question. Thanks very much for the conversation on that one. Right up the back.
Hi, I'm Carly from Foreign Affairs and Trade. I work on trade, and a very common theme is competition. And I wanted, following on from this collaboration discussion, to get a sense of the panellists' views about competition and how that contributes constructively and not so constructively to innovation, particularly competition within the APS, but also from outside.
Ooh, competition in the APS.
Jason, do you want to kick off on that one?
Sure. I think competition's vital, actually, in a positive way. The old cluster model, for example, if you want to buy a motorbike in Melbourne, you go to Elizabeth Street. If you want to buy a used car, you go down the Nepean Highway or up to Ringwood. I think competition is vital to create, like I said, the vibrancy of a particular industry. It also pushes individual players within that competitive landscape to be more innovative, because if you're just one of the herd, you're not going to thrive. You might survive for a while, but you won't thrive. So I think competition in a positive way is actually quite vital. I don't see any downsides to competitive landscapes at all, actually. The only downside is the individual players who don't keep up. And that's just natural selection in my view.
Carolyn, what about in the social landscape?
Yeah, I would agree with Jason. I think one downside that we experience, and I think it's partly because of the current kind of funding landscape that we're in from a social perspective, is sometimes competition drives people. Well, it's a mixture of competition and people trying to stack up their own business model. Forces people to operate outside of where their core capabilities are. And so you have, whether it's government departments or innovation labs or intermediaries or not-for-profits offering services or support or pushing themselves in areas where they haven't necessarily built their capability. And I think that sadly that's something we've seen a little bit more of. And I think another driver of that, though, I think competition and brand is part of it. But I think the other thing is that in the social landscape, we don't talk about business models enough. We don't talk about how value leads to outcomes and how you fund that. And so sometimes out of sheer desperation in trying to get our business models to stack up, we end up operating outside of our core capabilities and hence don't do justice to the people that we're serving.
And I'll add to that. I think that what organisations, regardless of the type of organisation, needs to do is to continue to understand the environment in which it's operating so that it keeps its core capabilities relevant. So I've seen many businesses who have struggled because they've got this terrific core capability, but there reaches a point in time when nobody cares about it anymore. We've seen this in the print industry, for example. We've got a great core capability about print, but nobody reads a newspaper anymore unless it's on an iPad or some device. There's whole rafts of different organisations who are completely struggling because, they don't sell newsprint anymore and they don't sell newspapers, so news agencies and all those sorts of different businesses, they're going to struggle. So it's about, yes, core capabilities, but making sure that you're continually refreshing those capabilities to ensuring your relevance to your environment.
I think, do you mind if I touch on that?
Quickly.
All right, just quickly, I think that first of all, people tend to see competition and collaboration as being anathema or at odds, and the fact is that it's through competition and collaboration, and every industry has shown that when you get the mix of competition and collaboration right, then things work, whereas we tend to just focus on competition. I think in the APS, I have seen behaviour where people are worried about jobs or worried about whatever, and they end up trying to compete in a way that isn't focused on outcomes. It's just focused on an individual's needs or whatever, and that's just survival on one hand. But I think that we do sometimes put a little bit too much focus on the career path in the APS and not so much on what we're doing and the outcomes of our work and the importance of that. So I think competition is vital and is important, although historically competition and collaboration have to work hand in hand, otherwise competition actually kills itself. But competition can interfere with outcomes if we're not careful in how it's applied.
Thanks, Pierre. I think we had a question in the middle.
My name's Craig. I'd just like to draw attention, I suppose, to winning the day, having innovation win through as such, and how we overcome some of the resistance or fighting the paradigm, as it were. Those barriers to innovation, particularly in an APS sense. I suppose to extend, we use the term best practice, and yet best practice in itself is actually contained. The ANAO use better practice. You'll never see it a best practice guide. It's a better practice guide to allow for innovation. Yet we seem so slow. And I'd say in this room we have a number of innovators given the subject. Yet how do we win it through? We can, fly under the radar and make the mistakes and sorry, boss. But that doesn't necessarily win it through, particularly when we're talking about larger risk. We've got the media cycle that we hear so much about, that the politicians have to respond to, the risk aversion. Invariably, we are in a domain that I think it would be fair to say is risk adverse. So in some ways, I regret that perhaps our leaders aren't sitting in this room as well, rather than ourselves. But I'd be interested to hear in your take, particularly from the lessons of innovation being successful, of what won through, what got it there in the end.
Yeah.
I think that there's a couple of key ingredients, but we all need to acknowledge, especially in Canberra, you're operating in a political environment, and I think Pierre mentioned it before that politics does drive policy to a large extent, and so that's just a practical reality that has to be acknowledged. Even in that environment, though, I do see some movements towards really embracing innovation on an organisational level. And I'll give you an example from a client who shall remain nameless because this is not public yet. But we've been working with them on redesigning their policy unit. But we've done it in a way that we've ring-fenced the innovation that we're helping them build within their policy unit, or it's not even that's not the correct way of putting it, to create a policy unit that is designed around innovation and that is innovative. We've ring-fenced that from the current business as usual policy development and implementation work that goes on. To be able to ring-fence it, you need the support of the leadership within the organisation to do that, because they're going to have to protect the project from the powers that be at times, but they also have to ask different questions of that group to which they would ask the traditional policy unit. And the traditional policy unit is driven by performance, as Carolyn mentioned before. The innovative policy unit is driven by innovation. About sometimes outcomes are unclear and are unknown, and so the leadership is important, but also the right people within the team to set the right culture within that ring-fence team is also critical. And so what the major difference that you see between these two groups, when you've got business as usual running alongside the innovation pilot, is you've got this, it's just, like Jason said before, it's just this vibrancy. It's there's collaboration, there's playing in a sandbox and drawing on all the tools and stuff that you need. And it's coming into the organisation, out of the organisation. They're connecting with the service delivery parts of the organisation. They're connecting with the consumers and the end users of the policy, and they're bringing all that intelligence in. They're doing the usual stuff of building the evidence base from the literature, but then they're testing those assumptions with the service deliverers and the end users. And so it's this dynamic, iterative process, which is completely different to the business as usual, which is you generally get a consultant to do a literature review on what's an evidence-based way of doing X, Y, Z. Let's then use that to inform the policy design. Let's then, as an edict, once we've finalised that, tell the service delivery arm that they've got to do their services in accordance with this new policy. So the other way is completely dynamic, completely iterative, achieving much better outcomes, not just because the policy is better, but also because it's a process of engaging the key stakeholders right from the beginning, and so they feel like they've been part of the process and they own it. And it's meant that but policy has come out faster and in a much more targeted and dynamic way. The challenge, which hasn't been resolved, which we're getting to the point now of trying to solve, is how do you then, if this innovative policy development practice works, how do we then make that the whole organisation? So ring fencing is really important for piloting, testing and trying it out. The challenge then becomes, well, how do you make this business as usual? Which I don't have an answer for as yet, but other panel members might.
Well, actually, I was going to, exactly on the back of that, prototyping is critical, is a key path. This is where I actually think the DTO is going to provide a really good opportunity for the APS, because it gives you a safe sandpit, which is already ring-fenced, that you could say, okay, well, we've got a new way that we want to maybe try something. We can, and then the DTO can be that sandpit. So it's like, okay, get some people from your agency, maybe from another agency, maybe from private sector, maybe from academia, and actually do like a 2 or 3 month, little prototype project to try something new. I actually think the DTO will be, one of the greatest benefits of the DTO will be creating that safe place to do sandpitting. The second thing is we need to, all of us, right, we need to change the way that we present risk up. So I remember when the social media, became all a buzz a few years back, and people were like, oh, well, here are all the risks of doing it. And I'm like, well, why aren't you putting into your risk matrix the risk of not doing it? Oh, hadn't thought of that. Quite often we need to sort of present, well, the risk of doing, traditional waterfall approach is this, the risk of doing agile is this. So we need to actually present the risk of status quo as much as we present the risk of the new way of doing things for comparison. Otherwise they're just like, oh, well, it's a risk, I won't take a risk. The final thing I say, it's only just quick, these are my personal rules of success. I have this plastered on the wall of pretty much every team that I work with, for what it's worth. Number 1, path of technical integrity. Obviously, I tend to work in techie teams, but it's the same for anything that we do. If you pursue a path of integrity with whatever it is that you do, then it's always defendable, and it means you can always reach out and get other people of integrity to defend it. The second thing is public success and shared glory. Share the glory with whomever you can, because it gets more people with skin in the game. Public success is critical, because if it's private success, it will always be inevitably thwarted by something internally going on, whether it's change in budget or change in politics or change in whatever. Public success, actually creates the opportunity for it to maintain sustainability. And the third one is build demand. If you have a market, if you have a demand for what it is you're doing, then it again creates pressure to keep it going. If there is no demand, and you can't build demand, then maybe it shouldn't be something that should be being done anyway. So path technical integrity, public and shared glory, and build demand.
Carolyn.
I'll just give you one brief snapshot of probably one of the bravest transformative leaders that I've come across in the country, and it's a Director General in New South Wales by the name of Michael Coutts-Trotter. Michael Coutts-Trotter is the Director General of Family and Community Services. Now, Family and Community Services are far from perfect. They've got a really long way to go. They've come from quite a dark, challenging place, but Michael Coutts-Trotter, to me, is the epitome of what we would love to see in public sector leadership, in terms of his ability to be bold, to be brave, and not just talk about rhetoric around innovation. Let's be innovative and throw it into every sentence, but someone who's actually prepared to follow through and create the conditions for it, who backs his staff, who really gets behind everyone at every level. And I think something we haven't talked about today is values. And I think that the values that Michael brings is evident and filters right down through one of the toughest, most complex government departments in the country. And so I think, how do we find more of him? I'm not sure. But I do think that absolutely kind of transformative leadership and strong set of values and lived experience that he brings to government is absolutely something we should shine a light on as a demonstration of what's possible in government.
I'm going to try and move us along a little bit. We are now 8 minutes past 11 and I'm supposed to start wrapping up now, but I've got a note saying we should go until 11:30, and I really want to make sure that you've asked the questions you really want to ask of this panel. So I think we've got a question here next, and we'll try and for the next 20 minutes, and then we're going to wind up. We'll try and be fairly quick, so I'm going to throw to one of the panel members for each question. If there's something burning that everyone that us need to add, we can add it, but otherwise I'm just going to try and throw around, and we'll jump back and forwards with questions and answers a little faster. So down to you.
Thank you. My name's Misha. I'm from the Department of Industry and Science. So I just started a graduate program here and have kind of been introduced to the policy cycle. So they put up the nice diagram, and I thought, no, fair enough, it's pretty neat. Just want to put out an invitation to radicalise me and maybe give me an alternative view of the policy cycle. Is it even a cycle? So maybe you could shed some light on that.
I'll just tweet you a link. It's cool.
Yeah. It's not a cycle. I'll just say it's not a cycle.
It's not a cycle.
It's not a psycho.
Psycho, maybe.
Psycho, yes.
So it would be good
So
to send
totally
that
have
link
to be
around to
friends.
everybody. So
I'll hashtag
you'll
PS Innovate 15.
Great. So there's the
Well, sorry,
radical,
that's just my
link. We're live, interactive, and radical, which is probably a dangerous place to be lately.
Engage with the risk.
Danger with the risk. Next question.
Yeah, my name's Jonathan Beck. I'm from the Department of Environment. Just building on Jason and Carolyn's comments around talent and that being an important pillar, I just wanted to expand on that. What do you think can change in the APS and thinking about talent, and what vision might you see in 20 years' time about thinking about org structures and work teams and, yeah, those things going forward?
Jason.
Thought you wanted to wrap up in 20 minutes.
Bite size.
Yeah, wow. Okay. I think it's about, firstly, in recruitment, it's hiring different minds. We have a tendency to hire people who fit, right, as part of the recruitment process. I always look for people who don't quite fit because I want them to come in and shake it up. So even in our own company, our managing director, we just hired a couple of folks and said, oh yeah, I think they'll fit very well. You've just not sold it to me, right? I want to interview a few more people. And so it's about, not too far left of centre, but you've got to focus in your recruitment about getting diversity within your team. Second, it's what do you do with the folks who are already there? It's about exposing them to different mindsets. If they just come to the office at 8:45 in the morning and leave at 5:15 in the afternoon and just go through the motions every day, well, that's a problem. It's about giving them exposure to different ways of thinking. And you can do that formally and informally. In my last role, I was exposing our guys in our company to Ferrari Formula One pit stop processes and go and interview Shannon Bennett from Vue de Monde and how do they come up with those creative desserts, and really giving them left of centre type exposures, but then bringing that back down into a way of thinking that we can implement in our own organisation. So we were running process innovation reviews on key organisational processes, using the lessons that we'd learned from those two examples I've just talked about. So I think that's, you can actually build talent. A person's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimension. So I think that's really important.
Can I say 10 seconds? Just think one.
Go ahead, Pia.
We're going to make it sexy to work in the APS. We really do. We've got to say, you want to change the world, you want to make life better, come work here. I could get twice the money I earn currently in the private sector. I'm offered jobs all the time, but I love what I do in here. So la passion is important. The second thing is the security clearance process. Seriously, we're going to do something about that. Personally, I took 18 months to get in. So yeah.
And I guess I would just say really quickly, what's the employee experience of government? It's not good. It's not just about what money you get and how much leave you get. What is your experience of being an employee, and how do we think about remuneration in different sorts of ways? I think values are really important, and how do we recruit the right people for the right jobs? When we recruit the wrong people, how do we get rid of them? And I think that we need to be employing, as Jason said, different skill sets. I'm a big fan of designers. I think we should be incorporating design more strongly into government, and not traditional kind of policy people like me always. I think business and design need to be playing a much stronger role in government.
Yeah, I agree.
Great comments. Next question. Where are we?
Hi, I'm also a grad, like the fellow over there. I guess so my question sort of goes back to what was asked a little bit previously as well, when you're talking about a bit more of a personal level. So I'm finding very new to the APS. I know the grads are brought on to, learn and to sort of bring a fresh perspective to things, but I'm also finding that sometimes I feel that there's so little expectation that you remove the fear of failure, but you also remove the ability to achieve. And my question is, from a perspective of inexperience, how do you couple your inexperience or overcome your inexperience to innovate upwards so that the process that has been imposed on you isn't something that you then carry forward into the rest of your career?
Start a movement. You got other grads. Seriously, start a movement. We did some BP, and it was really cool. We got all the grads together. So I love my quotes, right? So the mightiest of rivers lose their force when broken into many streams. Right? So come together and create a movement. That would be my advice.
But also just stay true to yourself. Just don't adopt stupid things.
And build relationships outside government.
Yeah.
Strong relationships and mentors outside government.
And check what's happening outside of government. I had a wonderful grad. He was so enthusiastic and so excited about something, and he wanted to help me design a consultation process about a very, very important topic. And I said, how would you do it? And he gave me the way he was taught. And I said, okay, now I want you to pretend you're a person that cares about the topic, which I know you do, and pretend that you're a citizen that's tried to engage in the process. And he just went, oh. I'm like, yeah, empathy is important.
Yeah. So I like outcomes, right? So as an outcome of this, start a meetup group for grads in the APS, right? And just do something.
And then invite us, yeah?
You guys are the lifeblood. Okay, we've got action as well as radicalism. Next question.
My experience of working, I'm Hugh Morgan from the Environment Department. My experience of working in the public service is that it can be at times very busy. There's a lot of just busyness, busy work. And this is a question actually for Pia, and something you said in your intro, that you had automated 60 to 70% of your workload. How the hell did you do that? And how can I do that?
Well,
how can we all do that?
And I mean, this was fun. So when the job I came into, the coordinator part of my job, I was introduced in the first day. It was like, here are all the important reports. And I'm like, but those 3 reports are effectively the same thing. Why don't we just do them once? Oh no, they like them in the very specific format. I'm like, so? What? So here's what it is. Either I can spend this much time and put all this time and all the branch managers in our division, because I was doing divisional coordination for my FAS, right? And so it was kind of like, here is the amount of time it will take us versus the amount of time it will take the 3 EAs that I send these reports to look at it in a slightly different format. Okay, cool. Are you happy to sign off on, this waste of time? And no one is ever. So part of it's about looking critically at what you're doing and saying, well, actually that process is stupid or repeatable or whatever. And some of it was just unnecessary. So it was like, one of them was collecting. Actually, this was an easy one. Collecting media releases. I just set up a Google alert, a Google News alert, which actually got more of the media releases for the area that we're in, because Google's the Google alert is good for IT rags, whereas traditional media collection stuff wasn't actually getting any of the IT rags. So part of it's just about looking at what you do critically and looking at how you can do it better, and just challenging and saying, is this actually necessary in the form that it is? And in a lot of cases, we're really bad at doing data-driven stuff in government. We tend to sort of say, well, here is the form. It's like, well, why can't I do that in a programmatic way? Why can't I do that in a data way? Why can't I we already have that information collected over there, so why can't I just write something that extracts it from there and pushes it to there, and now I don't need to do it manually every day? I think that is actually a really good form of innovation, is just not just doing it, but thinking critically about it.
Natalie, do you want to make a comment on that before we go to the next question?
I was just going to add, just to echo Pia's point, but also just to ask also why, what's the point of this? And that's what all good consultants do. If they do their jobs right, they ask clients. Clients might come to us with we want you to do this, and then you ask, why do you want this, and what's the driver behind this? And actually it turns out they don't actually what they originally came to you with. They actually want and need something else. They just didn't have the way of articulating it or the information to put it in that way. And so always ask why. How's it going to be used? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the pain you're experiencing? And so can we solve that in a different and more efficient way?
Next question. Where are we?
Hi, I'm Samantha from Environment. Just want to touch on what Jason was saying about hiring someone that doesn't traditionally fit with the role. How do you sell your talents for a role that you might not be seen to traditionally fit?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. Real life example. What you need to do is to understand the outcomes of that role and what that role needs to achieve, and then pitch how you're going to do that differently. right? So I like design thinking. I think if you go and have a look at what Stanford have produced around design thinking and apply that to getting a job, right? Actually understanding what they're looking for, why they're looking for it, why is the purpose of that job and why does that job exist? And then bringing your own unique lens to answering those questions, right? And build some design thinking into your own interview process, I think would be a way to go. But great question, thank you.
Oh, and critical thinking.
Yeah.
Just critical thinking. Don't believe the hype all the time. Just actually think about it.
I just say force them to raise their own bar. Like I have this conversation at home all the time because my husband's a paediatric intensive care nurse, and he really he's just won a job to basically rebuild the education course around that. And he went in there, and he and I'd done heaps of work on his interview, and he went in there and he showed them all these different scenarios around what the business model could be and how they were really limiting themselves in what they were doing, and a sense of possibility, and completely opened their minds up to what else was possible and really inspired them. And I think, tap into your own sense of passion and your own values. And me, who is employing quite a lot of people at the moment, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Also, don't be discouraged if you don't win on the first go of doing that, because maybe that organisation isn't actually the right fit for you.
Totally.
So I think, when you're going for a job, it's just as much about you sussing out the organisation and the team and the culture as it is about them. And if they don't get it, if they don't see your intelligence and your overall fabulousness, then maybe it's not the right fit for you.
I have to say you have an enormous opportunity, because the APS job advertisements are so generic and so broad that you have a real opportunity to make your case, and just hope, exactly as Natalie was saying, that they recognise the value. Next question. Who's got the mic?
Hi, I'm Michael from Department of Defence. We've spoken a lot today about how we build support for innovation within the way the agencies that we work for, and I'm just wondering if part of that is changing the way that we account for what we do. I think a lot of monitoring and evaluation and statutory reporting, even in what we do, is based around what we do rather than what we change. Is there a way to provide information to those that make decisions and those that need to see what they're paying as a result in a different way that forces that change? Because if we are talking about magic beans, then there's always a giant on the beanstalk who like wants a golden goose or wants his beans back. So, just some comments on that, maybe Pia or anyone else.
I think part of that comes to the risk aspect, and to basically going, saying up, here are the different approaches, and including the traditional approach, and here's the risks. I think part of that is about demonstrating value as we go. Even if we're not asked to put in place a measurement framework that shows the value of what we're doing, we should just do it as good practice in our own work. And then, A, if it gets questioned later, B, if we have to defend it, or even, if it's like, oh no, we should be doing that in a different way, we can say, well, actually the evidence is blah. And part of it's also about just reusing what's already out there. So a lot of the statutory reporting, my favourite case of this at the moment is we're being recorded. My favourite second case of this at the moment is actually the contract data that was mentioned before. So by publishing the contract data publicly, it's always been available, but just not as accessible as we made it last year, and making it historically available. When we get lots and lots of questions about, well, how much money is spent, it's like, well, the data's already available, go to and have fun. So it dramatically reduces our reporting requirements. And indeed, with the statutory reporting around, the amount of contracts over 100,000, whatever the very specific, I can't remember the name of it, the particular report, Harradine report that everyone has to do. Why isn't everyone just pointing to a cut and paste of the data rather than everyone going through that statutory reporting? And then the third thing is, so using what's out there already, defending what we're doing with good evidence, and the final one is when we're proposing stuff up front, we should, even if we're not asked for it, be building into it the outcomes of this and the outcomes of that and the outcomes of that are X, Y, and Z, and hence this is probably the best option, even though on the face of it maybe it's got a higher risk or whatever, because the outcomes are actually better. Because if the people up the chain are choosing to sign off on something which has lower outcomes because it's got lower risk, then that helps put into their minds the idea that maybe they should be valuing what's higher outcomes. So I think there's a lot of work on us to do some of that, and to help change the system that way.
I'm a big fan of measures drives behaviours, and if you start with the outcome in mind, right, what are you trying to achieve, and then measure the achievement of that. I had this conversation only 2 weeks ago with a client, and they were frustrated. We're not getting the sort of traction that we want around our innovation, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, how are you measuring it? And they said, well, we're not. I said, so, people are being rewarded for, business as usual behaviours. Well, where are they going to put their energies, their time and their focus? I said, you've got to come to a view of what the outcomes are that you want to achieve, set measures on those outcomes, and then cascade those measures through the organisation. Then you're more than likely to get action.
We're going to have to move to the last question, and then, just forewarning for our panellists, I'm going to ask them each very briefly to provide you with what they want you to remember from them at this panel. I did want to ask a question about how we measure performance on these types of events and how we actually see changes in behaviour around organisations, but I don't think we've got time for that. So we're going to go to a last question and then a round table on the panellists.
Hi, Chris Golding from Environment. In a lot of conversations around innovation in the public sector, you hear a lot about how badly we do it. Just wondering, what do we do well in the innovation space?
Who wants to take that?
As I'm not from the APS, I'll take an outsider's perspective on this. I actually think we do a lot of things well. I think the whole way that we've undertaken, say, e-government, if you wanted a better word for it, the access to data that we've got over different websites, the access to processes, etc. I think we've done extremely well, and in fact probably world leaders, or if not damn close to it. And I use a lot of those examples in the talks that I give to different groups around innovation in Australia. So I think we're doing that sort of stuff really well. I think we need to communicate that. We need to stop beating ourselves up and saying we're not innovative and there's all this resistance and it's really bad. There's a whole heap of stuff that we do that's really cool. I don't know of any other government in the world that does GovHack, in a process like that. That's really cool. And when I go over to Vietnam or China or wherever I go and talk to government groups about that, they go, oh my God, how do you protect your data and how do you do this and how do you do that? They just think it's so left of centre. So I think we've got to keep telling ourselves that it's not all bad. We're doing some really good stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's cultural as well. I think Australians tend to talk ourselves down a lot. Yeah. I remember when the new... Thank you. Please join us for a 30-minute tour. Please. I got to go. Going on a tour. Sure. I think that, and it's actually really interesting because when the new CEO for the DTO was announced, who's a pretty cool dude, Paul Shetler, they were like, oh, really looking forward to seeing what Paul can show us. And I tweeted back to him, I said, great, I'm really looking forward to us showing him what we can do. And he's like, yeah, cool. The fact is that there is some stuff in Australia that we are world first at. We have one of the best tech communities in the world. We have one of the most innovative communities in the world because we don't tend to put people up on a pedestal and just say, well, we can't do it because they can do it, like they do in some other cultures, particularly in the US, where it's a very pedestal kind of culture. We tend to say, well, if they can do it, of course I can do it. They're no better than me, that kind of... the tall poppy syndrome actually works for us in some ways. But I think we forget that. I think we need to celebrate our success a lot more. I totally agree with that, and I think we need to project that. And I think we need to when we identify problems, try and engage with them constructively. And I sort of hear people say, oh, this thing went wrong, therefore everything is terrible and everything's going to fall down and nothing could possibly go well. Well, you know, we've got to address the issues as we find them and celebrate the success as we go, and that will help, you know, continually raise the bar.
Go and look up, I think it's called Advance Australia. It's a network of expat Australians all over the world who network, and you just see where Australians are driving excellence across the broad range internationally. It's amazing. I heard the CEO talking on Radio National the other day. It's really inspirational.
And Silicon Beach. I mean, there's actually a network of expats working in Silicon Valley and all the other silicon areas around the world. Australians are driving so much innovation around the world, but A, we're not recognised around it internationally generally, but B, locally, we tend to say, well, we can't possibly innovate unless we go overseas, and that's a problem as well.
All right, we're going to wind up, and in the reverse order of the introductions, we're going to start with Jason, and I'm going to limit everyone to, say, 2 minutes of your take-home message for the audience here before we finalise.
My take-home, I actually want to come back to a question that was asked earlier about resistance. Because again, this is a big issue, and I see it in large organisations, whether they're government, non-government. I'm a big fan of understanding behaviour, and I see organisations struggling with, well, how do we get traction? How do we overcome this resistance? But they don't understand the drivers of the behaviours that they're trying to overcome. And so that's where I would start. If you understand, I'll come back to this notion of understanding your environment, but also understanding the drivers of that environment, the drivers of the behaviours that you see from people within that environment, then you are better able to craft strategies and tactics to be able to deal with it. If you don't understand what's driving the resistance, you're just going to be shooting blind. So that's my key takeaway. It's a little bit negative, but I made a positive comment out.
Thanks, Jason. Carolyn.
Mine's a little bit more personal, I guess. I would ask each of you, are you in the right job? What's your passion? What's your burning platform? Because when you're in the right job and the passion for what you're doing is so strong, you'll make it happen because you won't settle for anything less. And I think that too many of us settle for mediocrity and just, sitting in a place where we're not that happy. I think if you can find your own burning platform, your own passion, and then really build your career around that, you will make it happen because you just won't be able to settle for anything less. And so that would be my advice to you, is to start with yourselves and understand yourselves in the kind of public sector ecosystem, and in what innovation is, because if you're not in the right place, then it's going to be really challenging to move anything.
Thanks, Carolyn.
So building on that, find your passion is critical, but part of that's also being true to yourself about your talents. I'd love to solve world hunger, but I'm a terrible cook. That you've got to figure out what you're actually good at, because what you're good at, you will be able to do really well. And so be passionate, but also be true to yourself and sort of have that integrity. I think the key message for me is about that collaboration and building a community around yourself, and participating in the broader community and realising that even if the artificial constructs of where you work encourage you to sort of stay within your silo, you don't have to do that. You can go out and be as broad in your thinking and in your practice as you want to be. And the final thing is system thinking. System thinking is a very handy way of trying to map out the landscape, map out the players, and find the levers, because you can hit your head against a brick wall, or you can find the lever that'll actually shift the mountain. And I tend to try to find the levers and then play with them. So, and that takes a lot of self-awareness, a lot of critical thinking, but also the entrepreneurialism that was spoken about before, so that you can get out there and play. Have fun, really.
Thanks for your Natalie.
I would say innovation starts with you. And I guess that's just an articulation of what everyone else on the panel has said. But one strategy we use in our team inside policy is we always ask, what if? What if we did this particular step in the process this way instead of that way? And the most important what-if question you can ask, especially if you're designing policy, especially if you're designing services and programs, is what if we did this and what would the impact be on the client? How would they feel about this? And don't just hypothesise, actually ask them and get them to experience it at every point in the process, and that is the way that you will really drive innovation.
Can I sum that up in 10 seconds? Again, another little quote. Most folks stand for nothing more than more of the same. We've got to stand for something or we'll fall for anything.
That's a good point to end on. Thank you, Jason.
Oh, okay, 2 words, be awesome.
Be awesome. Be awesome. So, the message is with you. Go home, go back to your office, challenge your managers, challenge the people you do manage, and don't walk away from this as just another discussion. I honestly have been truly challenged and inspired by hearing the 4 people around me. I think we're incredibly lucky that they've given up their very busy schedules to join us here. So can you all please join me in thanking them so very much?